Hey everybody, it's Rockula. Welcome to Rockula Retrospective and another episode of the Zappaphile. My previous episode was called the Zappa Starter Kit, and that concentrated mostly on the albums that you could listen to that are produced by Frank Zappa that are not as difficult as the other albums. I hesitate to say easier to listen to, but not as difficult, we shall say. Got a lot of positive response to that episode, and a lot of people commented in the comments below, and obviously I'd like for you to do that with this episode as well. And this episode is going to concern the day that you discover the depth of the Frank Zappa catalog, and this episode is going to be called The Shoebox. In the Zappa Starter Kit, I explained how my first exposures to Zappa were through the Dr. Demento radio show and a friend who had a pretty decent Zappa collection. But what I'm going to talk about this time is the moment when the Frank Zappa universe opened itself up to me and showed me the enormity of and complexity of the Zappa universe. So let's go back to the late 80s when I'm 19 years old, working at a mobile gas station in Garland, Texas, and I'm working the overnight shift. Lots of time on my hands, and sometimes my friends would come in and hang out with me. Well, one night, I was listening to Zappa on my little jam box thing, and they were giving me shit, calling it Dr. Demento music and all that other stuff. And some guy walks in, and he hears what they're saying, and then after they leave, he comes up and says, I'm a big Zappa fan, and we started talking. And turns out that he just bought the old master set, and I talked about how I just had my measly little 6 tapes that I had gotten off of my friend. And I thought that was the end of the conversation until he comes back later and hands me a shoebox. He goes, "This is for you." The shoebox is full of Frank Zappa tapes, and incidentally, they're on the Maxell XL2S 90-minute cassette tapes that I love so very much. So he said he had just gotten the old Masters box set, and he was giving me these tapes, which he also mentioned were recorded directly off of his original vinyl collection. And that's going to come into play a little bit further down the line with the Zappaphile, because we're going to talk about the issue where Frank Zappa digitized his collection, and it was kind of a mess. So we don't have really a lot of time to talk about that. But what we're going to talk about here is the way that the shoebox, all the tapes in the shoebox, influenced me. Now, what happened is that in 1999, all of the Zappa tapes that were in the shoebox got stolen out of my car by some crackhead at Moon Tunes. So I can't tell you exactly what was in the shoebox, but I will tell you this. There was a compilation tape that he had made called Various Opaque Melodies, which I really liked. And it was just an all-encompassing, general Zappa collection. Then there was a tape called Mystery Disc, and I think that he recorded that off of the CD of the old masters. But then you've got everything that's in the original Zappa, chronology. You've got Freak Out, Absolutely Free, Lumpy Gravy, Rolling in It for the Money, Cruising with Reuben and the Jets, Uncle Meat, Burnt Weenie Sandwich, and Weasels Rip My Flesh. So I spent several months trying to comb through these tapes, and in the middle of the night with nothing to do other than I was cleaning the parking lot or just sitting on my ass without seeing a soul for hours. And I started to realize that some of this stuff was really hard to listen to, and I tried to listen to everything, but I couldn't get through some of these. And the 4 albums in particular that really gave me head-scratching moments were Uncle Meat, Weasels Ripped My Flesh, Riz.
Ooh. Weasels Ripped My Flesh,
Riz. Lumpy Gravy, and then, what was that last one? Burnt Weenie Sandwich. These albums were completely erratic. There would be a cool rock song or a novelty song and so forth, but then all of a sudden there would just be these interjections of random fragments of sound, sped up, slowed down, chopped up, all of that, and pieces of orchestral music. Now, I knew that the Mothers played brass and woodwinds, but there were some things on here, like on Uncle Meat, where he introduces the London Philharmonic Orchestra, and I'm thinking to myself, wait a second, what stuff in here is the Mothers and what is an orchestra? And I'd later find out, and we'll get into some of those albums where he's using an orchestra. But I was really confused by all of that. And I started to gravitate towards the more easily digestible tapes, But the 2 albums I really didn't care for were Freak Out and Cruisin' with Ruben and the Jets, because they were pretty much parodies of 50s and 60s music that I didn't really identify with. I realized that Freak Out had a couple of noise pieces, some weird stuff like Who Are the Brain Police, but in general, it was just, parodies. So what I ended up doing was gravitating towards 2 albums in particular, which was absolutely free because I'd heard a lot of stuff, the Duke of Prunes, Colony Vegetable, and all that stuff that Dr. Demento had played. And so I got into We're Only In It for the Money, which turned out to be probably my favorite from all of the Mothers of Invention albums. And in the next episode, I am going to review We're Only In It for the Money. But once you take a lap or 2 around the Zappa catalog, you start to notice that there's some material that will repeat familiar themes. They'll cross-reference other songs. And when people talk about an artist's catalog, they usually talk about from point A to point B, beginning to end of the catalog. Not only is that more with Zappa because he had way more releases, but you're talking about A to B, but at the same time, you're talking about above and below. Which brings me to another point about the Mothers versus Frank Zappa's band. Now, in the Zappa starter kit, it's mostly Frank Zappa's band. But when you get into the Mothers, they didn't have as much musical depth. So what ends up happening is there's a lot of conceptual depth to the Mothers music. And that's where it gets a little bit harder for me, having grown up with the whole idea of band, records album, releases album, and it's the band. I didn't really understand about all of this other stuff that Zappa was doing by bringing in other recordings and, chopping stuff up. And you'll start to notice also after the Mothers, he will take all of his old stuff and rewrite it in a different kind of musical genre. He especially loved doing reggae. So what this brings up is a concept called conceptual continuity. And we will get into that I'll probably do an entire Zappaphile episode on conceptual continuity, but what that means is that everything that Zappa does can reference anything else that Zappa does. And it's really interesting when you first start to realize it, and then you start to comb through all the Zappa and see all the things that he's talking about, and you get to be part of the club. And obviously my new word for these people in the club are Zappaphiles, just like you. So let's talk about the next episode, which is going to be We're Only in It for the Money. So what I'd like for you to do on this episode is comment to me about what it was like for you when you first saw the Zappa universe unfold in front of you. And to me, I mean, I want to know if it was easy for you, because it was really intimidating for me. So I'd like to know what your impressions were of discovering the bulk of the Mothers and Zappa's work, and starting to try to get it all digested into your brain. And for the next episode, where I'm going to do We're Only in It for the Money, I'd also like for you to start thinking about some of the comments that you'd like to make on We're Only in It for the Money, because I'd like to hear them in advance so that I can include your comments in the actual episode that's coming up. So please make sure that you comment below, like and subscribe and share and all of that stuff. But either comment or contact me directly and tell me what you thought of the We're Only in It for the Money album. So hope to see you next time on the Zappaphile. I'm Rockula, and this is Rockula Retrospective.